recognised by the New Zealand Association of Scientists and the PSA, so thank you very much to those two organisations for bringing us together today. My name is Hon Chapple. I'm Director of the Institute for Governance and Policy Studies at the School of Government at Victoria University, and I'll be chairing today's session. We have 5 speakers, one from the National Party, the Minister of Science and Innovation, Paul Goldsmith, who's not yet here, Dr. Megan Woods from the Labour Party, Gareth Hughes from the Greens, and Geoff Simmons from TOP. We have formal apologies from...
I'm here too.
Oh, Tracey. Oh, sorry. And Tracey Martin from New Zealand First. My apologies, Tracey. We have formal apologies from the Maori Party, who can't be here with us today. Now, the makeup of the panel is too important, indicates that science is too important to be left to the scientists. We have an educationalist, we have 3 historians, and we have an economist talking to us today. Now, each presenter is going to have 5 minutes to summarise their party's policy priorities as a funder of science and as an employer of scientists. That gives us about half an hour. We will then have half an hour for questions from the floor, and also a number of people have written in questions, and we will endeavour to answer or ask those questions as well. Now, the deadline is a hard one because a number of people here have to get back to Parliament at 2 o'clock, so we will run strictly till 1:30. Okay, Paul, welcome. I've just done the introductions.
I'm sorry, I apologise.
And I think we'll give Paul a bit of time to get himself together. We will start with Megan. Megan, welcome.
So to stand here, look, kia ora tātou everybody, 5 minutes, science go. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. I've had the science portfolio back in the Labour caucus for about 4 months, I think now, but it is a portfolio that I've held before, and that I also have a professional history working in the science system before I came to Parliament. So my PhD's in history, but before I came to Parliament, I worked for proper food and then planted food research as a commercialisation manager, so I have worked in the science sector. At that time, I was a proud member of the PSA and still am, hold my membership of the PSA, so it's good to be here. Look, our commitment to funding science really starts with our education policy, and it's something we looked at very closely in our Future of Work Commission. I'd like to emphasise it's STEAM, not STEM, for us in Labour, that the arts are an important part of us being an innovative economy as well, and that they do need to work together. But we do need to make sure that we're building a future-focused education system right from our ECEs that is going to set our kids up with the skills for us to have science strength in this country. That goes through in terms of being a funder and employer, obviously through to universities. The headlines there, we are committed to a review of the PBRF system. We think the PBRF system, as it was put in place, has probably squeezed most of the efficiencies by filling in forms and ticking boxes that it can do. And that it is timely for us to have a look at what the PBRF model set out to do and what it needs to do in the future. That we also have said that we think that we have to have a review of the Tertiary Education Commission. That as we set up TEAC, as it was back in the day, that it was meant to be a strategic body for setting the direction of research and tertiary education in this country. We think that it's ceased to be that. That it's become, in some instances, a provider of widgets, and that we need a body there that has that strategic overview of what is happening, and something that we are committed to. We are committed to 2 funding models that bring collaboration. It's okay, I'm not suggesting the full merger of CRIs and universities. I know it wouldn't be a vote winner in this room, but what we do have to have is funding mechanisms that incentivises those bodies to work together. Because I know I've spoken to people in here who are the human embodiment of that collaboration, that they will have part appointments across both CRIs and universities, and that is a feature of our science system in New Zealand, and a feature of what our science system is going to continue to be. in this country. So we've got to make sure that we're not using a whole lot of the money in an overly competitive environment, but that we're using as much money as we can for actually doing science in a system that encourages collaborations. The National Science Challenges, I had my doubts about them when they were put in place, and I still think there's probably tweaks that can be done. What our commitment in government to be, what Labour will do, is work with the science community, the people that are working at the coalface of these challenges, to find out how these can work better. I think that there are still gaps in our National Science Challenges, the great scientific questions of our day, and we don't have a climate change National Science Challenge. I find a little bit perplexing. So I think there are still some gaps that need to be filled in, and make sure that we still have places for new ideas to go. That was always one of my concerns when the National Science Challenges came in. We need to ensure that Marsden is funded. We need to, of course, we need to be looking at our investment in science, both from a business and from a government perspective. We are behind the OECD on both of those measures, and in careers. I may have left the portfolio for a while, but I am reliably informed the issue of career paths for scientists remains a hot issue, particularly around postdoctoral access to postdoctoral support, and I think that's something we have to look at. I also think we have to look very carefully at ensuring we have career paths for people outside of academia that don't look and feel like failed academic careers. Other countries do it, and really successful countries do it. And I think we don't do enough of that in New Zealand. Maybe it's the fact that I hold a PhD and I'm working outside academia that gives me a vested interest in making sure that we make these look a little bit more glam. But I think we all benefit when from the beginning of a PhD, people are imagining how they fit into other parts of society rather than a university, that they're thinking about their place in industry, a la Germany. So there we go. I think it's a little bit more than 5, but there's the potted summary. Thank you.
My name is Tracey Martin. I'm the education spokesperson for New Zealand First, Women, Communications, Broadcasting and IT. You did not hear science in there. I was the science spokesperson among those other portfolios last term, but this term it's Gareth Hughes. So, but to give you a bit of an oversight of the direction that New Zealand First feels that we've taken, and the direction that we need to take with regard to our science experts and our research and development potential. My father-in-law was a DSIR scientist when the DSIR was disestablished. He's John Dugdale, and he's one of New Zealand's leading entomologists. So I listen often to John talk about and how he works. He's still employed. He's 89, I think, now, and he's still working. Because I don't believe scientists ever die. I think they just keep discovering stuff. But I guess what those conversations, one, what I saw happen when we broke down the DSIR, what I've seen happen with scientists since then was a lot of, and what Australia did, which was the complete opposite of what New Zealand did with regard to their scientists, was that we devalued science on a lot of levels during those changes. We commercialised science on a lot of levels. And almost, I also remember on the first Education and Science Select Committee that I sat in, something like a 20-minute to 40-minute conversation trying to convince the national government that the words public good should remain inside a piece of legislation regarding science as opposed to the words net good. So we were trying to explain, you want that with me then, Megan? So we were trying to explain that net good is an accounting system, you know, and that public good. Yeah, Callaghan legislation, there you go. So I think that while there's bits and pieces inside here but no dollars around it inside New Zealand First policy on our website, I'm trying to get across to you that what we believe to be true is that there has been an over-commercialisation of science in New Zealand. And we agree with Megan with regard to how the PBRF has had some perverse outcomes around who can gain funding and who can't gain funding inside our universities. The Cawthron Institute that I went down to in Nelson was doing some amazing commercial work for muscle spat and so on and so forth. And in their break times, the young scientists there were playing the sounds of the ocean into large buckets with mussel spat at different levels to try and see whether that would, they would get bigger faster. Now, the fact is that that's a point of interest. That's something that is of interest that could be a real commercial opportunity to go down the track, but they have to do it in their break times because the capacity to say this is something that might be really, really profitable for New Zealand, but it also might be just a whole lot of time that we spend on trying to find out something. So New Zealand First wants to open up the opportunities through scholarships or other grants and so on and so forth for that blue sky thinking. I also think that one of the other things when we came back from Taiwan, where Taiwan has a single place called Taiwan Excellence, where they showcase the science and the inventions that they do for their people, all in one place. And we think it's about time that New Zealanders knew the amazing science that their scientists do. There are so many pieces of work from NIWA and the mapping of New Zealand to Scion and taking waste products and turning them into other things that New Zealanders know nothing about. So therefore the value of science inside their own minds is somewhat depleted. I also pick up on the fact that Megan talked about the Y-Care projects and other projects that were inside our schools that lost their funding under this government, that bred that excitement, that investigative nature that we need in scientists as we grow the next generation on. So those are the basic tenets of where New Zealand First comes from with regard to our science policy, and it's about recognising the public good, balancing it with commercialisation, but realising that sometimes you find out stuff that isn't right, and it's just as valuable. And the other part of it was too, the privatisation of our science. We have had universities say to us, we have managed to find, we've managed to find out information that we are now unable to release into the public domain because it's owned by a company. And that means that the next person will ask the same question and use up some more money to find out the same answers. So there has to be pieces of legislation around, and I think Hawthorne's got a bit of a model. The private company has a period of time that they own that information, and then it goes out into the public domain. So those are the kind of conversations New Zealand First is having. Sure.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for coming along for a little bit of public engagement in the election period and the opportunity to have a discussion about a very, very important subject. And so, just say hello to my parliamentary colleagues and would-be candidate from United Future. Tom. It's funny actually, we've got the Labour and National spokesman for science both being historians, but anyway, I only managed a master's, so you're one up on me there. Although the topic of my thesis was one of our early scientists, William Colenso, who I wrote about, and so I've spent much of my time at university scratching through the early editions of the Transactions and Proceedings of the New Zealand Institute, and of course we have a very long and I think proud history of science in this country, and so that's what we've been trying to build on in government these last 8.5 years, and it's why we've consistently in the recent budgets at a time of quite severe financial constraint continue to invest heavily in science, and we're around about $1.4 billion a year that we spend, and on a track to 1.6 or so in the next few years. And every budget there is new investment. And why do we do it? Well, the way I see science in the broader sense is, I suppose you could sort of break it down into 3 areas. There's a lot of science that goes on to provide solutions to our national challenges, and whether it's maintaining the quality of our water, understanding the geological risks that we have, or dealing with biodiversity type issues, and that's encapsulated by the national science challenges, but it's much, much broader than that. There's also a lot of science that's fundamentally around providing the evidence upon which we can, in government and in industry, make evidence-based decision making. And so laying that data upon which we can make sensible decisions is a fundamental part of the whole science sector. And then thirdly, of course, there's an element of science work that goes on in the country that is ultimately designed to create ideas and innovations that will help our companies be more competitive internationally. And so all those three things are important, and that's why when we look at our science sector, we ensure that we're covering that wide range of activity from pure science, which has been funded through the Marsden Fund and PDRF, both of which we put extra resources to, and the Health Research Council, through to the Crown Research Institutes, where they can be doing fundamental science, but also quite closely related to industry, through to the Inquirer-led, the mission-led work of the National Science Challenges, and then to the other end of the spectrum at the Callaghan Innovation area, where we're trying to encourage business to invest more in R&D close to market. And on top of that, we do continue to want to see in that area where we're talking about ideas and innovations in order to make our companies more competitive, to see more commercialisation of that science. And so that's why we put an effort into the pre-seed accelerators, such as through KiwiNet and Uni Services. If there's a broader challenge that the New Zealand economy faces, I think we're very good at coming up with ideas. Where we sometimes struggle is translating those ideas into successful companies that employ New Zealanders. And that's not surprising, because we've got a relatively small domestic market, and so it's actually quite hard to develop a company of scale domestically. We end up having to export quite quickly, so that's why we have a lot of effort in that area. And then in the broader effort around trying to encourage interest in science in schools, I'm particularly proud of our Nation of Curious Minds effort that's been going on in schools around the country, trying to continue to give life to that wonderful topic of science and encourage schools and teachers to find new ways of doing it. Just yesterday in Morrinsville, meeting a bunch of kids who were out there, basically potting cabbage trees, but also learning about the role of those trees in filtration of water, and to see the curiosity and the excitement in their faces on that topic, I think was important. I thought I would just take the opportunity today, actually, of announcing another extra little area of investment. Just today we'll be announcing $21 million over the next 7 years for REANTS, the Research, Education and Advanced Network of New Zealand, to ensure that the country's top researchers continue to have access to that important cable, or the infrastructure around high-speed internet. And there's been a bit of a debate about the ongoing funding of that for a while, and we're just announcing that we're committing to that as a fundamental piece of research infrastructure in the country. And when you think about, I don't know how much my time, but when you think about what can the government usefully do to encourage more innovation in the New Zealand economy, because we talk about science and innovation is a broader topic than science. It's partly about having that robust science infrastructure in place, and partly about the Callaghan grants, which are to encourage private sector investment, but it's much broader than that. It's about ensuring that we've got the right infrastructure in place, such as ultra-fast broadband, such as REANS, and those things. It's also about skills, and that's why the national government has connected it with the tertiary sector, ensuring that we are generating the right skills in order to drive the science sector over the years. It's also about regulation, enabling things to happen, of course, is the most useful thing. It is a staggering thing that we've been able to develop a space industry in this country in a very short pace of time, partly because we were nimble enough in our regulatory setting to allow it to happen. And so that's a big part of the equation as well. And I could go on, but just thank you for having us here, and looking forward to the discussion. Thank you very much.
camera control your standing, so right?
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, okay. Kia ora koutou. My name is Geoff, and as Simon pointed out, I'm an economist. So I would like to think of myself as not quite part of the family of scientists, but maybe, you know, yeah, exactly. Maybe that kind of, you know, long forgotten third cousin once removed that's left in disgrace and occasionally comes back to family reunions to, you know, eat the cake or something. That's probably how economists fit in. But I think, I mean, you guys know more than anyone that science is the real driver of wealth. New Zealand has an abysmal record with R&D spending, and we also have an abysmal record with productivity as a result. So, for the non-economists in the room, that means we don't work smarter as a country, we work harder. And when you look at the international data, compared to other countries, we work longer hours, we are focused much more on adding volume rather than value. So that means we get growth by bringing in more tourists, sticking more cows on the land, more shit in the rivers, all that sort of stuff. That's how we tend to grow as an economy. And we're hitting the limits of that now. You know, we can't keep working harder, we have to work smarter. What's the big barrier between us doing that? Well, it's actually not government spending on R&D. Government spending on R&D is pretty good by international standards. Sure, it might be better, but if it's going to be better, it's really got to kickstart our business R&D investment, which is the real standout, the real shocker by international standards. So why aren't our business sector investing in working smarter rather than working harder? Well, part of the answer I've already given you, because in the past it's been easier to work harder, to stick more cows on the land, etc. But also because of our tax settings, which encourage a speculative economy rather than a productive economy. We have tons of money in New Zealand, but we stick it all into bloody houses. And it's crazy. You know, we accept that that's a way to get rich, is by buying houses off each other. Really? I mean, Europe doesn't do that, and that's why they have higher research and development spending, and that's why they are richer than us. For the time being, yes. But over the past 30 years, since the much promised changes of the 80s, we haven't seen that productivity shift, and our tax system, our environmental settings are all major drivers of that. So I just wanted, before I dive into the detail, I wanted to cover that big picture stuff, because that is really what TOP is all about, the deep systemic issues that are driving the way our economy is structured. And we want to kill housing speculation dead, stick a wooden stake through the vampire's heart, so that there is... Oh, well, no. That's... Paul, you're a bit behind the 8 ball on that, mate. I mean, even local government New Zealand has come out in support of our cap position, which isn't a top position, a party position, by the way. That's just, Gareth. Anyway, back to the important issue at hand, which is science. So that's the funding side. We do have an R&D funding announcement that's coming, but I can't tell you how we're going to pay for it today. So I'm not going to tell you what it is, but it will be coming out in the next few weeks, and it is fully costed, fully funded, and will boost R&D funding in this country. So I just want to touch on the quality and the employment side of this, and I think some of the other speakers have touched on this. We need to make sure that scientists are independent, that they don't have gag clauses, and that we make sure that our science funding is independent and long-term focused as well. You know, we are suggesting a few things in our policy about how that could be improved, but I will let that discussion evolve in the questions.
Kia ora, namihinui, koutou, kia ora. It's awesome to see you here. Thanks for donating your lunchtime to it. I'm Gareth Hughes, I'm an MP for the Green Party, our science spokesperson. If you've seen us in the media these last couple of weeks, it feels like we've been living in a bit of a test tube in the Green Party, some sort of public science experiment, the impacts of pressure on a political party. But look, we're coming out of it stronger and more committed than ever, because the issues we're working on and prioritising in Parliament are the issues that scientists are informing us are deadly important and critical. I'm talking about things like the declining state of our water quality in New Zealand, the urgent need to actually protect our climate and leave our future generations a safe and stable climate. The outputs from research like the Dunedin longitudinal study, which is showing the impacts of inequality on our society and in fact indeed on our economy. So look, we're more committed to acting on what scientists are urging us to act on, evidence-based decision making. We're going to launch the PSA, Craig from NZAS, and my other panellists. While we're sharing our science stories, I don't have a doctorate or a master's in science. I've only got a degree, so I feel a bit undereducated. But acknowledge that science was my pathway out of my community. I grew up in a pretty working class family in Gisborne. I was fortunate enough to win a Royal Society environmental essay competition. I wrote about nuclear power, and I got to experience my first ever trip on an aeroplane, my first ever time to leave my hometown, to come down to Wellington to visit DSIR. So for many people, science is a way to a brighter future for them, but also at the bigger level, this is the future for New Zealand. And two watchwords the Green Party has when it comes to science is public and long term. The whole point of a Green Party in our Parliament and what we want to achieve in government is greater long-term thinking. And I think this is something we've fallen over in recent years. When it comes to science funding, it's a focus on the short term, the next output, commercial outputs. Look, what we want to see is scientists doing science, not spending all their time filling out forms and pushing paper. That's got to be the focus. Now, the other panelists haven't talked about it, so I want to quickly make a few comments around the importance of science to society. Because many of you would have been out there with the Rally for Science, and we are seeing science under attack from Trump. I've seen it in Parliament with some very unfortunate comments relating to science in Parliament, declining evidence-based decision-making with policy decisions. We need to make sure that science is front and centre in our society. And that's why the Green Party is supporting upgrading Sir Gluckman's current role as the Prime Minister's Science Advisor towards what Sean Henty's calling for, which is an independent Commissioner of Science. That's why we've talked about the need to open up some of the access to scientific data. For example, with the US National Science Foundation, who requires public dissemination plans with their public funding applications. We want to see scientists speaking out. It's concerning seeing some of the surveys that scientists have felt they haven't been able to speak out and act as the critic and conscience on incredibly important issues. I want to see scientists more active, and Veronica, I'm not trying to single you out, but we also need to see science in our media, and we need to see a greater role of science communication in that sense. In terms of our Parliament, we've done some things like a speaker science dinner every now and then. I think we need to have a conversation with politicians. How do we encourage a more informed scientific discussion amongst our parliamentarians and policymakers? And I've got some suggestions there. In terms of funding, this has to be our economic future for New Zealand. The plan as a country, and Geoff, you sort of touched on it, but it's to cram tourists in Fiordland. It's to cram more cows on our paddocks, and we're seeing the impacts on our waterways. There's no limit to the amount of export of ideas, of software, of services. This has to be our future, and it's incredibly damaging for our economic future if we stay in the bottom half of the OECD for investment in R&D. If our scientists are patenting 4 times less than the developed world average, this needs to be our future. So we've made, last election, a commitment of an extra $1 billion over 3 years in terms of R&D funding. We'll be making some more announcements. But our watchwords are increasing public funding and increasing long-term funding. What we had seen, of course, is such a focus on those short-term outputs. Echo the comments made by Megan in terms of reviewing the PPRF. What we want to see is an increase to core funding. We need to make sure there's more funding certainty going forward. Also, we need to focus on some of those, what the late Callaghan talked about, is some of those interesting niches. Because what we've seen from a recent the National Science Statement, we do have expertise in areas which you wouldn't think that alone New Zealand has. Areas like astronomy, areas like computer science, energy, areas that fall out of the current CRI basket I would put to you. So we need to make sure that we can focus on some more pure science, more long-term funding, and make sure that there's funding certainty for scientists. So they're doing the work they need to do in the lab and not filling out forms that only 10% are actually accepted. So we'll have some more information in terms of the detail, but we've been very clear in terms of our direction, which is public, long-term, a greater role for science and scientists in our community in the public conversation. I'd like to thank you for the work you do getting that out there. So kia ora koutou, thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. We now move on to the opportunity for questions. And without further ado, I will ask Craig Stephen, who's the President of the New Zealand Association of Scientists, to kick us off, and then we'll take questions more generally from the floor.
Do you want to use that, or can I shout? I can shout. Hi, I'm Craig Stevens, President of the New Zealand Association of Scientists. Thank you very much. Thanks for coming along. So the association has a 76-year history of advocating for science and scientists. And so I guess I put it to you folks. How do we make the halls of the beehive resonate with scientific ideas? How do we have more exposure? I don't mean sort of necessarily the big monolithic things that would come through the normal institutional pathways, but we have thousands of people in this country whose job it is to think up new things. How do we get those ideas in front of you folks so that when it comes to thinking about how to put out resources, it's a no-brainer rather than a battle?
I'm happy to lead off on that. And that's something that I think is incredibly important. I think that we don't make enough of something that's happening already, and that's the chief scientists that are in a number of government departments. And I think that this is a resource that could be utilised a lot more, not just for government, but also for Parliament. I'd like to see those chief scientists coming and talking to legislation at select committees a whole lot more, and actually giving us some of the evidence base, because a number of those appointments aren't full-time appointments, that they're practicing scientists that are out there sort of at the coalface with you. So I think it would be useful for parliamentarians in making that not just government. I think that we've kept the expertise resource too closely within the executive. So you have Sir Peter's role as the Prime Minister's Chief Science Advisor. I echo what Gareth said. I think there's actually a role akin to the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment, where you actually have someone who is the servant of the Parliament rather than just the government. And I think that there is a ready army of these chief scientists within government departments that nobody beyond a few pointy heads like ourselves know who they are, what they do, what departments that they are appointed to, and we could make a whole lot more of that.
So for me, we have Gareth mentioned that we have the science dinners once a month, right? And while they're reasonably well attended, because there's always a lot of things on in Parliament, they're not well attended by 121 parliamentarians who should know the fascinating science that is going on in this country. So for me, I think having somebody like Sir Peter Gluckman as the servant of the Parliament, a greater coordination between the science body and the parliamentarians lift the status of science inside the Parliament. And I would actually go through the whips of the parties and make some sort of major commitment. Maybe it might only be a big dinner once every 2 months then, and to showcase some of the incredible science that we've got going on. And also a commitment to pull in some of the smaller scientists that are working around New Zealand. For example, Paul Decker, who's trying to do the eel breeding program in with the Japanese, because he can't get any funding from the New Zealand government, which if he breaks the eel breeding program, we're sorted on a massive scale with an export market. So for me, those dinners have I never even went to university, so I'm yet a layperson. And I've never been more amazed by what has actually been produced in our country that nobody seems to know. So I would like to work really hard if I come back on actually creating a much stronger status for those dinners inside the New Zealand Parliament.
Yeah, it's an ongoing challenge to attract the attention of parliamentarians who maybe slightly less often, slightly more organised. I think it is a challenge for the science spokespeople of each party to encourage and enthuse their colleagues to show an interest. But I suppose the thing I would say though, I wouldn't underestimate the impact that you do have, certainly in government. And I can think of several cabinet committee discussions where the science advisors from departments have played a very important and incisive role. So Megan may have a point in terms of the broader parliament having access to them, but certainly within government decision making, they have a very significant role.
I'm wearing a badge which says free, frank and fearless, which is awesome. We have an awful lot of scientists in government, not just chief scientists, but they're everywhere. I jokingly refer to my mates who are in the public sector, I refer to their salaries as hush money, because of the ability they have to speak out on important issues. I think we need to free up the public service in general to be serving the public rather than ministers, and that will, if we improve the transparency and the openness of the way our public service works, then I think, science will end up much more on the agenda. Ultimately, I'm a little bit cynical about, dinners at Parliament and stuff like that, because ultimately politicians listen to polls which are driven by the public. So I think you have to go through the public rather than the politicians. He's not a politician, obviously.
I've got just 3 quick comments to make. I think we need to upgrade the Speaker Science Dinner. I was Geoff, you don't want to hear us having dinners at Parliament is the answer. But part of the problem is it's basically, to me it's felt like a bit of a blow shop in terms of the subjects. What I'd like to offer my hand to the other members and Geoff, MPs return to Parliament is Vic's form a cross-party group of MPs to work on science issues. Tracey and I have worked together on a cross-party internet forum because we saw some very unfortunate comments relating to technology and the internet at Parliament. We've got together, we've upskilled MPs, we've had the founder of the internet, Sir Tim Berners-Lee there. We've actually changed things at Parliament. So less than just a talking shop. I think what you'd like to see is a group that can actually work on issues and make recommendations. So that's what I'd like to be part of the next term of Parliament, is a cross-party group of MPs to work on science issues to advise the Parliament. Secondly, we need to upgrade Sir Peter Dutton's role. It was a good experiment, a first step, as Craig has said, but I think we need to strengthen and entrench the role. Now, both the General Ombudsman and Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment offer a great template as independent officers of Parliament, given an independent budget line and independent remit. My concern is it is too close to the executive. I'd like to see it more independent and arm's length from politics. The best way to do that is by making it an independent officer of Parliament. And thirdly, it's around, I've talked a little bit about open data, but we also need to encourage open access to scientists. Now, this is something we as decision makers have a real hard time with, because if I want to talk to a scientist or visit a CRI, I need to get ministerial approval.
Yeah.
I've tried to get, well, I'll give you an example. Today, a controversial decision has been made on a seabed mining application of the Taranaki Bight. Now, as a policymaker, 7 years ago, I did the right thing and went to NIWA to get some advice on the state of science and the state of the ecology. Because of commercial imperatives, I wasn't given any of the most recent science over the last 2 decades. I was given typewriter written reports from the 70s, and this controversial decision has been granted today. So what I'd like to see is more open access, but it's not just about politicians, it's about the media. We need to stop these gag clauses to encourage scientists to speak out. Because I've got, I don't want to cry on it, but the cutest story I've seen with my kids, my little girl Zoe's 6, and it was a fancy dress party for Halloween, and she was wondering what she should dress up as. And you know what she said? Carl Sagan. I was the proudest man. I want my kids and all kids in New Zealand to see scientists on the telly, in the newspaper, and speaking out.
I'm just going to quickly throw this back on you guys out there too. We need scientists in Parliament. And that actually we need people to be considering that as becoming part of the process as well. I know when we lost Moana Maki from our caucus at the last election, we now do not have a qualified scientist in our caucus, and it's a gap that we've identified.
Great. Greens are kicking them out.
Question time?
Yes.
We can get a lot of analysis out of scientists about what's wrong with the current science system just by asking them. Any old tea room will get a range of views, multiple views per scientist sometimes. And it's great to hear that you guys, some of you have got policy, go vegan, and some of you are going to have policy, go Geoff, and some of you haven't got policy, you love science, so that's great. So my question to you is really simple. What's the most burning issue for the science system right now? Is it that it needs more money? Is it that you need to improve the allocative efficiency? I'll give you some ideas about that if you want to ask about that later. If you think we need better priority setting in science, I can also talk to you about that. Or is it something else?
Great question. Start down with.
I'll start. I've never developed a policy sitting inside that building without discussion with the sector. That would be arrogant of me. I've just told you, I never went to university and I don't know your sector. So I'm not going to answer your question. I would suggest that if I was in a position that I needed to come up with that solution, then I'd have to pull the leads of your organisations in and ask them that question.
I mean, the way that we go about that is through a pretty strongly structured discussion around the National Science Strategy, which is what we've developed over the past few years, which has an agreed set of priorities that we work towards, and so and you upgrade that every few years as part of a very broad discussion with the industry as a whole. I'm never going to make everybody happy, but I think that it's one of New Zealand's assets as a country is that we are small enough so that we can actually have a meaningful discussion about these things. And so, we've set out a strategy which sort of underlies that these are the areas that we're working on. And this is a direction, and it's not one single bullet actually, it's about continued, steady, predictable investment with a sort of an upturn on a regular basis. My sort of impression coming in as a new minister is that there's been quite a lot of structural change in the sector over the past few years, and so I'm always sort of reasonably conscious of the cost of change in terms of distraction and so my instinct is to have a period of relative stability in terms of structure, and we know areas that work pretty well, and so you put extra resources into those areas, such as the River Fund, which is what we did with the budget.
Thank you. Absolutely agree. Tea rooms are great places to get ideas, and as much what I was saying about national science challenges, I'm not going to come in here today and tell you how we're going to fix it. What I'm going to give you is a commitment that we will actually work with the science sector, because I think the answers of how we can improve those challenges lie with people such as yourself. I think the biggest challenge for me is connecting all the bits together. That we have a science system that is split across a number of votes in terms of funding. Some of it comes out of the tertiary vote, some of it is within the MB vote, and it's how it is that we put these bits together with competing but not necessarily unproductive tensions that exist within there. So how do we put this together to have something that gives us the long-term science, fundamental science that we need? One of the things I know from having worked professionally in the commercialisation of science is that politicians very quickly say, we need to commercialise great science. Well, actually you start funding that 20 years before you get to the point of being able to commercialise it. So we risk our future by not investing in fundamental science. You don't just invent things with a Callaghan grant, that you've got to have invested in the science that lies behind it. And I know when I worked in that field that some of that stuff was actually science from the 70s, was typewritten reports that actually was the fundamental and basic research that sat behind it.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely some examples of poor allocative efficiency. The amount of time spent on admin is definitely one of them. The other example I see is in the agricultural sector, where a lot of the money is going towards the sort of the big ag models of the past. How do we, which is all because of the need for co-funding from fertiliser companies or Dairy NZ or whatever. Whereas we should be thinking and investing about what are other models of agriculture going forward. But I would say probably the biggest issue is one of funding, and as Gareth has pointed out, there are some examples of where that's a public sector issue. We should be charging commercial water users, we should be charging commercial users of the ocean to invest in understanding those ecosystems a lot better so they can be managed better, for sure. But I think the big problem is lack of funding from the private sector, and I would say that where that money is missing is going into the D part of the R&D, the development side. We have a lot of good ideas, but we don't, finish them.
Yeah, it's a great question, and look, I can only reflect what I've heard from the sector or from scientists, and it's that sense of funding with certainty is the thing I've heard over and over, and the need for balance. There's a role for short-term commercial science, don't get me wrong, but I think many people felt the balance has gone way out of whack in terms of such a focus on market-based, competitive, short-term outputs demanded from scientists. We need to think of the future. We won't always do things the way we've done it in terms of the economy and society. I agree with AUT's John Rain, who says we're missing out when we look at areas like big data, artificial intelligence. We need to be looking at the future, not just the past. It's about balance.
Just a short and sharp yes or no question. Do you think New Zealand should have a climate commission modelled on the Office of the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment?
Yes. We don't have a position. I'm not going to say yes or no. I don't have a position.
Yeah, I don't have a clear sort of sense of that.
No is the answer from National.
Yes. Yes.
Given one of the themes for today's discussion is the government as an employer of scientists, I'd like to hear from each of the candidates how much they know about how many scientists are employed by government, what departments and ministries are they in, and how are those numbers changing. Are scientists being employed more in one department than another, and how do you feel they're being used and valued?
So in terms of employment of scientists, most scientists are employed by government one way or other in New Zealand, whether it's through a university, a CRI, or as you say, increasingly within government departments. And it is a growing trend within public services throughout the developed world to increase evidence-based policy making. And that is something that we certainly as a Labour government will be utterly committed to. And I've already talked about the need to actually bring out of the shadows some of the chief scientists and the teams they have with them to a much more public space and dialogue. And I think that's part of valuing them. I think the work that does and can, I think that we could do a whole lot more. I can't tell you how many are employed in our government departments, and I think that's part of the problem. I think that we don't know enough about it as a society, about what is going on, some great work that is happening within the core public sector in terms of evidence-based research. And I think as a society, we would benefit from those experts and those practitioners being part of public debates, that we can't be scared of experts speaking. and experts being in the public and talking. So they're one of the things that I feel really passionate about and that we need to utilise a resource that we have that I don't think we make nearly enough of. Thank you.
I'll be really surprised if anybody can answer your question on this panel, so I'll be listening intently to see whether anybody can. But I would just pick up on the word employed. What I'm hearing is there's a lot of people getting a contract every now and then, because, so to actually, for scientists to find, for a lot of our scientists to find overarching employment that can sustain them has become a real challenge. But I can't answer the specifics about who, where, how many, how long. Sorry, I can't do that.
Well, I used to be quite good with numbers, but I'm not as good as I used to be. I have a vague recollection of about 12,000 scientists across the government, the broader sector, but I could be wrong. The bulk of them are obviously in the CRIs and the universities, but there's also significant numbers, reasonable numbers in DOC and MPI and in the health area, and I think actually one of the more useful things we've done in recent times is develop these sector roadmaps, which again sort of points back to what are the priorities for science in a particular area. And so we've had one in the environment and doc space, which is connecting the scientific work done in those departments with the broader scientific endeavours of the CRIs and the MP funding and the university funding, just making sure that we're all more or less on the same page. It's not been done before, and it's actually a significant advance. We've got that DOC and environment roadmap. We've just done the primary sector roadmap with Nathan Guy. There's a huge amount of work that goes on in MPI and science, and also in the private sector. Ontario, for example, employs a large number of scientists. I've just come from Zespri this morning. I've got a team of scientists, etc. And then we've also had the health research strategy again for the first time, working out what the priorities are. And so we've been pouring a lot of money into that area, but there hasn't actually been an overview of what a strategy is. And so I think that's been one of the more useful things, that we're trying to connect the scientists right across the broad spectrum of government departments and the private sector that's involved.
Yeah, I mean, if there are numbers, I doubt they include the vast bulk of scientists who are employed in the public sector at the moment who are not employed in science roles, either because they can't get science roles or because, as Megan said, they are, the public sector is seeing the need for having scientists involved in what we would consider generic policy analyst positions. So, it lies down in statistics, really.
And I just quickly say, to a good question, I mean, obviously we don't rely on philanthropy or Patreon to fund scientists, so it's mostly public funded through CRIs, universities, independent groups like Forthon. I think another interesting subsidiary question would be, what percentage of scientists are spending their time on science versus administration? How many more managers do we have in the science sector? I think you also raise a good point, because in terms of as being an opposition MP, my role in the select committee is to look at the past year. We very rarely actually ask the question, what's been the trend over the last 5 years, the last 10 years? And I think that you raise a really interesting question that we should be asking. Another interesting question, which we know the numbers aren't good, is in terms of postdocs in New Zealand. And what we do is spend all this money training people through their undergrad, and then they head off overseas for their postdoc. So surely it doesn't make sense. It was disappointing to see that decision a few years back.
I'll take Chief's privilege and ask a quick question, which a written question. We know that we have low retention and attainments for Moray Pacific students, particularly in the science area. Is this a problem, and what would you do about it?
And this is where I was talking about going right back into the education system. So actually one of our education policies is around bonded scholarships in areas of identified teaching shortages, including science, math, today and other specific vocations. What we do need to do is get more Māori and Pacifica in classrooms to be role models as the science teachers. That is really important, that it starts from those very early years. We also do need to ensure that we have, and our universities are starting to do really good jobs. I know that the work that's been done at, I'm very aware of what's being done at Canterbury, and I'm also quite aware of what's being done at Auckland in terms of providing that pastoral support for students as they go through. I know that in the history department when I was finishing my PhD, that one of the issues for my Māori and Pacific colleagues finishing was actually they were getting offered jobs because we have such a shortage. So that actually, even finished, you're getting the job offers rather because people kind of want to tick the diversity box for the workplace, and it's actually having the perverse outcome of actually stopping people complete. So I think that while it's, it's fantastic for the individuals, they were pretty keen to move into a salary, and I never begrudged them that it is a structural problem. So we have to be providing both support, funding and role models.
I agree with Megan, it starts right back at early on in the educational journey. So one of the things that New Zealand First has in policy is the return of te kahitanga, so that we can actually start to address the unconscious bias that is inside our schooling system, both for our students, our teaching fraternity and their parents, about what they are capable of. So that's firstly. Bringing back role models. And I'll just tell you a story in Australia. I'm still on the Board of Trustees, and I had a discipline hearing the other day for a young Māori woman, and one of her requirements to come back to school was she had to go and study 3 Māori women scientists because she was exceptionally good at science, but she was starting to drift. So by making sure that she realised there were people like her that attained, that the hope is that she will see and buckle down to her science. So there's that. Also, one of the biggest barriers for Māori and Pacifica when we talk about tertiary education is an aversion to debt. So one of the things that we hope downstream from our upfront investment tertiary policy, where we remove completely the student loan scheme and replace it with a skill return to your country, we hope that that will downstream encourage more of our Māori and Pacifica students to be able to stay inside a higher level of education, along with better workforce planning, careers and transition advice that will show that we don't have enough diversity in particular areas, and we will seek and make sure that we find them. Lastly, we have the First and Families Scholarship Program, which with no student loan scheme will go directly towards living costs and the capacity for urban and rural Māori both to be better supported inside our education system.
We've covered a fair amount of ground. Certainly, obviously we see greater engagement right across the community, also Māori Pacifica in science. We're making quite good progress on completions of degrees at the tertiary level. There's been actually a very significant increase in both Māori and Pacifica in the last few years. But fundamentally, the long-term solution goes right back to 11 and 12-year-olds having decisions about what they study, so that they maintain their options in literacy and numeracy in particular, and continuing on in maths and science further into their secondary school is the critical foundation there. And so that's partly what the Nation of Curious Minds is about encouraging, but it's also something that I know Nikki Kay is very focused on.
Just remember, you guys are scientists, so you're probably interested in the evidence based on these things. They've actually done quite a lot of work in the UK on getting, increasing, marginal groups in, various aspects of tertiary education. And they tried all the stuff that all the other people have been talking about on the panel, and it's all good stuff, makes a bit of a difference. But actually, the greatest difference you can make, dollar for dollar, is early childhood education, high quality early childhood education. That's because at the moment we have, we're talking about Māori Pacifica, but this is an income gradient, right? We're talking about a poverty gradient here. And we have these kids turning up at school 2 years behind their classmates. That's 40% of their life they are behind at the age of 5. And the most effective thing to take care of that, free, full-time, high quality, in other words with qualified teachers, early childhood education.
Geoff's absolutely right. And I'd say we don't just have a Māori and Pacifica science problem, it's also a gender issue in the science sector as well. And someone tweeted yesterday an image, the Google search icon of scientist and it was until the 30th icon after Lampcoats and Einsteins that there was an identifiably female icon associated with science. So there's another issue there. It's early childhood education. It's seeing it in our community. This is why I want to see an independent commissioner for science, someone with a mana and the public profile to talk about science issues. We need better careers advice at school. It can't just be the gym teacher doing it part-time. We've got to professionalise, we've got to modernise it. And there's some great initiatives out there in terms of scientists visiting schools, including the Mind Lab, which is out in a few cities such as Wellington and Gisborne. We need to encourage that so people don't see science as a hard, as a boring subject. Science is all around us in our daily life, and in fact it's tremendously exciting, so we need to get people to the ability to play and learn through play.
Well, it's the end of our hour, so I'd just like to wrap it up. I'd like to thank all of the 5 presenters for their contribution, which has been excellent. There's some really good questions from the floor. I'm sure there are many other questions that we haven't been able to ask, and my apologies for the fact that we haven't been able to get to. We've been dealing with some really big questions here. They're questions about what the value of science is and how we provide an appropriate environment for science to flourish. I hope this is a conversation that we can continue to have amongst ourselves and also with people who represent us in Parliament and in politics. Thank you very much for your attendance.